From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
What was usually taught in Philippine schools for years and years and years was, oh, the Spanish were here for 300 years, and then they sold us to the Americans for $20 million, leaving out this resistance, leaving out, the very important part that there was a Philippine republic that was disappeared very quickly.
Today, legendary independent filmmaker and author John Sayles' newest film, Amigo, is set in the Philippines during the U.S. occupation, featuring much of what he writes about in his new novel, A Moment in the Sun. We'll speak about many of his feature films that tackle themes of race, class, labor, among them Return of the Secaucus 7 and his famous film, Matejuan.
The way that the coal operators tried to keep workers divided in those days was what they call a judicious mixture, which would be to hire a third hillbilly miners from West Virginia, a third immigrants from Yugoslavia, Italy, wherever, and a third black miners from the South, where the mines were just tapping out, and they would come up and be trying to use them as strike breakers, often house them in 3 different places, put them into the mine from 3 different places so that they couldn't even meet on the job, and they thought, well, these people will never get together and form a union.
John Sayles for the hour. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. and Libyan rebels have rejected a new offer from the regime of Muammar Gaddafi as the conflict in Libya enters its 5th month. Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, had said his father would hold elections within 3 months and would step down if he lost. But the Obama administration rejected the proposal, calling it too late. NATO warplanes, meanwhile, have resumed bombing Tripoli as rebels attempt to advance on the Libyan capital. The rebels say at least 16 of their fighters were killed Thursday in what appears to be an errant NATO airstrike. The NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said the international attack on Libya is weakening the Gaddafi regime.
And we are making steady progress in Libya. Since we took responsibility for the operation 2.5 months ago, we have carried out more than 10,000 sorties. We have destroyed or damaged more than 2,000 important military targets. We have considerably degraded Gaddafi's war machine, prevented a massacre on the Libyan people, saved numerous lives.
The Obama administration, meanwhile, continues to face congressional opposition to the ongoing Libya attack. On Thursday, Republican House Speaker John Boehner called on the White House to further clarify the legal basis for the war in Libya or face a cutoff of funds.
The White House says there are no hostilities taking place. Yet we've got drone attacks underway. We're spending $10 million a day. We're part of an effort to drop bombs on Gaddafi's compounds. I don't know. It doesn't pass a straight face test, in my view, that we're not in the midst of hostilities. Listen, it's been 4 weeks since the President has talked to the American people about this mission. And I think it's time for the President to outline to the American people why we are there, what the mission is, and what our goals are, and how do we exit this?
Boehner's comments come one day after a bipartisan group of lawmakers filed a lawsuit accusing President Obama of violating the War Powers Act. New York Democratic Congressmember Anthony Weiner has stepped down in the wake of the online sex scandal that's dominated airwaves over the past 3 weeks. Last week, Weiner admitted to having what he described as inappropriate and explicit conversations with 6 women over Twitter, Facebook, email, and occasionally on the phone. Weiner had come under increasing pressure to resign from top Democrats, including President Obama and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. He announced his resignation at a raucous news conference on Thursday.
I had hoped to be able to continue the work that the citizens of my district elected me to do, to fight for the middle class and those struggling to make it. Unfortunately, the distraction that I have created has made that impossible. So today I am announcing my resignation from Congress. So my colleagues can get back to work, my neighbors can choose a new representative, and most importantly, that my wife and I can continue to heal from the damage I have caused.
Weiner had been seen as a likely candidate for New York mayor before the scandal erupted. A special election for his replacement will be held in the fall. The Republican-controlled Wisconsin State Senate has approved a new budget imposing wide cuts on public spending. Democrats say the measure will slash over $1.8 billion in public spending and around $500 million in funding for the Medicaid health care program for the poor. Republican Governor Scott Walker is expected to sign the measure into law. Protests, meanwhile, continue at the state capitol in Madison in the standoff over Walker's union-busting bill.
Recalls are great. It's one form of direct action. I have no problem with this stuff, but I really think we need to be taking more proactive measures as citizens as a whole. We need to start doing, reconsidering the option of doing a general strike. We need to be doing more to stop the proceedings that are happening in that house at the moment.
In international news, Syrian troops have moved into 2 more northern towns in the widening crackdown on protests against President Bashar al-Assad. Thousands of residents have already fled from areas where Syrian forces have launched operations. In a nod to the Syrian opposition, a cousin of Assad's, who's considered Syria's most powerful economic figure, has announced he's divesting from his wide business interests. State television says Rami Makhlouf will give up his holdings in fields including telecommunications, construction and oil, and donate his profits to charity. Israel's vowing to again use armed force to stop an international aid flotilla from reaching the Gaza Strip. Palestinian solidarity activists are expected to set sail from a number of ports later this month, just over a year after Israeli forces killed 9 activists at sea. A U.S.-based vessel is taking part in the mission, and Israeli Navy Commander Rani Ben Yehuda warned flotilla organizers to hand over their aid if they wanted to reach Gaza.
Supplies are getting into Gaza on a daily basis. The reason of the maritime security blockade is to prevent from terrorists and weapons to get into the hands of terrorist organizations in Gaza. And like we said before, I'm saying it again, we are inviting all the organizers of the flotilla to come to Ashdod and to transfer their cargo in the legal way into Gaza.
Among the boats that are part of the flotilla is filled with about 50 Americans. The ship is called the Audacity of Hope. It is planning to set sail from Athens, Greece, next week. A team of experts says U.S. nuclear safety rules do not sufficiently take into account the risk that a single event could knock out power from the nation's grid and emergency generators. A task force with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said safety equipment installed at a number of American nuclear power plants is not maintained or inspected as diligently as the original components. According to the experts, the U.S. has analyzed the risk of losing power from the grid or from on-site emergency generators, but not both at the same time. The task force was formed in the wake of Japan's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant disaster, in which both sources of power were simultaneously disabled. A federal report has found security screeners at Newark Liberty International Airport deliberately singled out passengers from Mexico and the Dominican Republic for prolonged questioning and luggage searches. According to the New Jersey Star-Ledger, profiling from 2008 to 2009 was so widespread, Transportation Security Administration employees began referring to their colleagues as, quote, Mexican hunters. The targeting of Mexican and Dominican passengers was apparently enacted to drive up the number of referrals by the airport's behavior detection unit so that it would appear productive. Arizona's superintendent of schools has ordered Tucson public schools to cancel a popular ethnic studies program or face the loss of $15 million in funding. Schools chief John Huppenthal says the ethnic and Mexican-American studies violates a new state law barring programs, quote, designed primarily for pupils of a particular ethnic group or that promote resentment toward a race or class of people. Republicans have criticized the program, which allows students to learn how ethnic groups have influenced history. Huppenthal has ordered the Tucson School District to prove it's complying with the law within 60 days. The House Oversight Committee has held a hearing on a once-secret government plan to encourage U.S. gun shops to sell thousands of guns to middlemen for Mexican drug cartels. The operation, called Fast and Furious, focused on using middlemen to gain access to senior-level figures within Mexico's criminal organizations. Run by the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, the operation has come under severe criticism since hundreds of the guns that were sold to the cartels were later found at crime scenes in both countries, including 2 at the murder scene of U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry in Arizona. ATF Special Agent Peter Forcelli criticized agency supervisors for evading accountability for Terry's death.
There were tragic errors made here, and nobody has shown the decency and leadership to step up and say, hey, we made a mistake and we should have done something wrong. That's what I find. as appalling as anything else in this case, short of course, the tragedy that happened to the Terry family.
Brian Terry's cousin, Robert Hayer, called for a criminal investigation into government officials involved in the Fast and Furious operation.
If the dragnet that is set to find everyone involved in Brian's murder will be set deep enough and wide enough to encompass anyone involved in Operation Fast and Furious. If the guns used in Brian's murder were part of this operation, then we'd want to know, will everyone in that operation that had to deal with those specific weapons be brought up on charges of facilitating the murder of Brian Terry?
And today marks the 40th anniversary of President Richard Nixon's declaration of the so-called war on drugs. Activists are marking the date with renewed calls for an end to U.S.-backed policies of criminalization and militarization. In an opinion piece in the New York Times titled "Call Off the Global Drug War," former President Jimmy Carter writes the Obama administration should heed the advice of a high-level panel, including 5 former heads of state, that declared the so-called war on drugs a failure and urged governments to consider legalizing substances, including marijuana. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.